it's an honor to introduce this session on responsibility and accountability. So responsibility, I think it's good, and accountability, as you've seen in the background paper, they are central concepts to when we reflect on equitable partnerships. And I think, so responsibility, the question is primarily who's responsible for ensuring a truly collaborative partnership. And then, as you've seen in the background paper, there is a risk that responsibility or a partnership can be one-directional. And when it's one-directional, it may reinforce existing power imbalances. And when we look at, but once we know who's responsible, we could also look at accountability, meaning that partners are accountable for the research they perform and for their partnership commitments. But here there are also two types of challenges, and we will discuss them also during the breakouts, and we will hear more about that during the presentations. There are some of these partnerships have external challenges and people and groups that are usually not seen as essential to the partnership, like funders, journal editors, global health agencies. To what extent do they challenge the partnership? Are they part of the partnership? Then there are questions around internal factors like the research partners themselves or the institutions. So when we talk about responsibility and accountability, we have to bear these two types of partnerships into account. Now, why discuss responsibility and accountability? As I said, in the background paper, they have been described as essential elements. So here are some of my introductory ideas. It's not an exhaustive list of issues that I want to touch on. To introduce the session that we will have today. As some of you probably know, I have been the scientific writer of the so-called CIOMS guidelines, International Ethical Guidelines for Health-Related Research involving humans. And we wrote that guideline 10 years ago. So I went back to the guideline, this was a nice occasion, to see what we wrote down 10 years ago. And we have a guideline on collaborative partnership and capacity building for research and research review. But we didn't use the words responsibility and accountability. Instead, what we did is describing the kind of partnership that we thought was ethically ideal. And so what we wrote down is that the desired partnership, desired relationship is one of equal partners whose common aim is to develop a long-term collaboration through South-South and North-South cooperation that sustains the research capacity and to safeguard against power differences. Innovative forms of collaboration should be considered. So I think implicitly you see here this idea that there's recognition that there may be power imbalances, and that what is needed, there's not, what was said before today as well, there's not one way, or like Carla described, there are different flavors. So there's not one way of an equitable, of conceiving this equitable partnership, but that it may be really important to look for innovative forms of how you can mitigate the risk of power imbalances. And I think we will hear more about that today in the sessions as well. I was also thinking, you could also introduce further background theories, philosophical theories on responsibility and accountability. And one of these theories that's helpful to me is the work of Jennifer Prah-Ruger on global health, justice, and governance. I think when we talk about accountability, her conception of accountability has helped me. It's always one of mutual collective accountability, like through mutual collective accountability, all actors working on health problems agree first on the same goals and respective roles and responsibilities in achieving them. Now, a third and last issue I wanted to mention is how we talk about partnerships and fair knowledge generation, a topic that Carla and Cesar have also touched upon earlier today. I think why do we talk about partnerships? Because we are interested in health knowledge and how that is created in a fair way. So I have been collaborating with Shreya Bimula over the past few years. He's a social scientist, and instead of phrasing this entire debate through global south, global north distinctions, he has made the distinction between the center and the periphery. And I think that will also nicely link to what we will say today in our session here. So for those of you who have been familiar with Shay's work, multiple papers on epistemic injustice and the pose and gaze in global health knowledge generation. It starts from this idea that you have a certain pose and you could look at the world with a certain gaze. And when you are in the center, you look at it differently than when you are in the periphery. And then if you combine that with ideas of epistemic injustice, so this idea, epistemic injustice, a term that originally is from Miranda Fricker, but he has translated it for the context of global health knowledge generation. I think what you could say is that there's epistemic injustice in the sense that I'm not interested in what you're saying, what is called the credibility deficit in his terminology, or you could also have it in a form of interpretive marginalization, meaning that it doesn't that it doesn't really matter what this group is saying. So so what we did is a literature review on how people are currently complaining fair knowledge generation in global health research. And we found a couple of things, and I think that resonates, or to me it resonated with the talks that Sassi and Stella will give. So one is that this idea that the periphery's technical knowledge of a partnership does not matter. For instance, we found in the literature that oftentimes frontline healthcare providers are rarely invited to participate in recommendations on risk benefits. And I think this is a nice link with Sassi's work. And what we also identified in terms of the periphery sense-making of partnerships, we found a lot of people saying the periphery sense-making of partnerships does not matter. And we found actually that a growing body of literature describes how partnerships should function, but there's a lack of practical and real-world examples of factors contributing to partnership development, especially based on the experiences and interpretations of people and organizations at the periphery. And I think also the two talks today, we will hear more about the periphery's experiences. So the focus of this session is then the responsibility and the accountability in relation to unfair knowledge generation. What does acting responsibly in research partnerships mean from the periphery, or if you want, from the perspective of the Global South? And how might this perspective challenge existing power structures between the center and the periphery, or between the Global North and the Global South, if you prefer that language? So the first presentation will be of Stella Kakito, and she has written a paper with David Musoki, and she will reflect on internal accountability on institutional practices of Makerere University in Uganda that undermine ethical research partnerships, and she will reflect on the responsibility of Southern institutions and the way in which they themselves sustain practices that undermine collaborative partnerships. And then it will be followed by a presentation of Professor Dr. Sassi Molyneux. She will discuss accountability through a participatory approach, and I think this is a nice link also with the the phrase in SEOMS that we really need innovative forms in developing research partnerships. So I think this approach is really a form of how you could conceive that, and as a means to establish and run a research partnership. Using this approach, she will reflect on acting responsibly in a research partnership and on how international research programs can ensure fairer research processes that protect frontline staff from moral distress. So here again, there's also a bridge with some of the issues I found in the literature on fair knowledge generation, is that oftentimes frontline staff is not taken seriously. So with that, I'd like to give the floor to Stella.
Thank you. So just show me how to use it. So, okay, colleagues, I'm trying to see if I can use the slide, the pointer well. Great. Good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome back from the sumptuous lunch that you had. Thank you, Rick, for the introductions. I'm Stella Kaketo, and a grants manager at Makerere University. Makerere University, I hope some of you know where Makerere University is, and for those who don't, it's in East Africa. It's specifically in Uganda, and it's really in the capital city of Uganda. We've been around for 100 years. We celebrated 100 years last year. And it's one of the oldest universities in Africa. And today I'm here to speak or to reflect on some of the institutional practices or some of the things that we do as an institution, or as individuals within an institution that undermine ethical research partnerships. I'm talking about this because I work in an office where I interact with donors, I interact with our faculty researchers who write the proposals, I interact with research administrators who are supporting faculty at their universities to write proposals. So I've seen some of these practices happen. They are the external practices, but also there are those practices we ourselves are responsible for as an institution that are perpetuating or enabling unethical research partnerships. Colleagues, I'm speaking from my own experience. Some things may not resonate with you, but from my own practice and my own experience, these are some of the practices that we have seen. I can't emphasize more how global collaborations are important, and they are important because they facilitate research. They enable us to access resources where we would otherwise not have. But while they do that, there is also the other side where they perpetuate, problems or inequities or all of these issues that we are talking about today. I've already talked about my positioning, so I won't say that again. And some of the practices I'm going to highlight could be familiar to some of you. Issues of tokenistic involvement, weak governance and infrastructure, dependence on donor agendas, optics-driven collaborations, and hierarchies that silence or exclude researchers, especially the early career researchers or the junior researchers. Let's talk about tokenism. You know, when I first put tokenism on my slide, I actually had to go back and double check, what does tokenism mean? What is the meaning of tokenism? And it would be nice for me to get, a feel of what some of you think about tokenism. Anyone who can plainly tell us in simple words what tokenism means. Joe, you look like you want to say something. Oh yes, go ahead. Yes, of course you. You were in my group in the early afternoon. Microphone?
Thanks for calling me out. Appreciate it. I feel tokenized. Is that a word? Yeah, it's a good question. I think tokenism is sort of feigning interest in something and presenting it as if it's of value to you when in fact maybe you have other priorities or interests that you're trying to pursue. So it's placing someone or something in a position of false priority. That's my understanding.
I think, we have another contribution.
Just another 2 words, lip service.
Lip service. Wow, very concise. So I think Joe is quite on point, as well as my friend from Somaliland. They are quite on point in terms of what tokenism means. And based on the dictionary that I read, it said tokenism is representation without meaningful inclusion or influence. From where I sit, colleagues, I've seen a lot of our researchers joining projects for visibility purposes, to be seen or to be part of the bandwagon, to say, oh, you know, MRC put out this call, and we as Macquarie cannot miss to be seen on that call. But what is your meaningful contribution? What technical expertise have you brought to the table in terms of putting together that preparation? We have so many faculty that, or researchers, and this is not only for the situation of Macquarie, but I know there are many LMIC institutions that fall in the same category. You have one senior researcher who is probably on about 20 grant proposals, and you wonder how they do teaching. You wonder how they go for the community service, because all these are mandates for typical universities, in addition to the 20 projects that they are running. And of course, when you are that widely spread or thinly spread, there is only so much commitment or energy that you're going to put in each of those different projects. And clearly, if you're not making any meaningful contribution to a project and you get paid for that work, that to me sounds like unethical practice. So the other thing that is a representation of tokenism in practice is the weak internal accountability, where many times we've actually seen incidences where researchers sign on institutional documents and commit the institution. The researcher gets a contract and they sign it and they send it back to the partner. I know some of our systems are not yet developed well to the point where, you know, you can't, where there are clear structures on how you go through a certain process, but especially when you receive new researchers and they do not exactly understand how the system goes. Some of them have actually gone again to commit the institution to activities that the institution would otherwise not have participated in. For example, if the document has not been reviewed by the legal office, and you, the researcher, are committing your institution to other partners in terms of what you're going to do as an institution. In fact, at this point, we are at a point where we say only the authorized representative can sign. Documents that relate to the institution cannot be cleared at individual researcher levels, and we've come up with clear policies on how to navigate that process. Of course, there are issues of gatekeeping, and outsourcing governance is very similar to what I've just talked about. Sometimes we are working together with our northern partners, and we are completely relying on some of the documents that they have sent us. They have their standard, let's say, MOU template. You know, when they send it through, we are clearly completely depending on the language they have included, or on the terms and conditions, that data, you know, confidentiality issues, data governance issues have all been predetermined by them. And I think it's a risk for us as an institution if we receive them as they are and we take them on as they are. And to this end, we have definitely instituted internal practices to see that we are not taking on, we are not inheriting. We are not just inheriting, but also making a thorough review and input to some of the resources that we receive from our other partners. And we have the compliance culture that is avoiding the difficult conversations, because people are always fearing to lose money. You know, the resources are scarce, and even more scarce at a time like this. And there is so much quietness. You know, you see clearly that the agreement is probably not reading that well, or the data control is completely in another region. You have issues of the governing law completely in another region where you have no control over the jurisdiction in that area, but you stay silent because you don't want, those kind of provisions put in the contract to jeopardize the resources that are coming. Okay, so that silence is what we've been speaking about, the silence compliance, and the gaps in the systems and governance. As you can hear from the discussion, when you have internal gaps in your systems and governance, there is so much that you get taken advantage of. One of the examples I indicated here is we have been in a situation for a long time where the data that we produce locally is hosted on some servers somewhere. And, sometimes they say, they're in the cloud. And of course, as technical people, sometimes you're asking ourselves, where is this cloud? Where is the data so that we can access it, so that we can be able to use it? It's local data here. So there are many times actually, and for a long time where we've had this data hosted somewhere else, and we've allowed it to happen, to which end you see that the researchers probably have no access to utilize that data in a way that they would actually fully utilize it. And of course, when it is somewhere else, you really have very limited control over what you can do with it and access to it. And without these governance frameworks, that is the infrastructure, ethics really are relying on goodwill. And of course, that's why we see inconsistencies and vulnerabilities throughout these processes. Also, issues to do with the absence of data management. Data is a key thing, and at this point for us, it's a critically key thing because some people say data is the new gold. I don't know, but of course, with the presence of artificial intelligence, I think data for sure is the new gold. And if you don't have frameworks to govern your data, if you do not have frameworks to protect, frameworks and policies to govern the way you enter into agreements, or even standard ways that you use to collaborate with partners, chances that you become vulnerable are very high. And on this cause, when I talk about lack of frameworks and governance, the staff welfare is something that is just as important. I know Sasi will speak more about it. Issues around protecting staff. Most of our ECRs sometimes feel unprotected and undervalued, of course, leading to moral distress, which Sasi will talk about more. And all of these, as we've seen, create a vacuum where inequity and unethical practices thrive. But remember, these are some of the things that are happening internally within our institutions, for which I think we can have some level of control over. And so I was going to move straight into the steps that we've taken, to try and take care of some of these issues. Because they're internal to us, I think we have some degree of control and to manage the situation and make sure that we see areas of improvement. But just before I dive into that, I hadn't highlighted the issue of donor dependence. I know many LMICs, especially South Africa here could be, a unique situation because their government, I think, injects quite some money towards research. But I know many LMIC institutions, including our own institution, the government puts extremely little money towards research, or sometimes even none. And if most of our research is being funded by other people, then how do we ground our research into the national priorities? We have our own priorities, but if we cannot raise resources to fund those priorities, whoever else comes and has money for other things, we shall toe the line for the other things. They say the piper, there is a saying about the piper, whoever holds the pipe determines the tune of the song. So in this case, whoever has the resources and is saying that this is the work I want you to do, chances are that you are really going to have to do the work that they want you to do, whether it aligns with the national priorities or institutional priorities or not. So the issue of funding is just as important as well. So what are some of the things that we can do or are doing to alleviate some of these problems? Sorry, I can't see too well there, so I'll resort to this. So of course, we've tried to consolidate ourselves and get in place the bureaucratic paperwork that is needed to make sure that we tighten some of the loopholes. We at an institution level right now, I'm happy to say that before we used to have MOUs for the different colleges, but right now everything has been standardized that if you're dealing with an external partner, you must follow, or you must at least fit within the guidelines of the standard institutional documentations. Issues to do with MOUs, subcontracts, grant agreements, data management. So that whole package or that whole suite of documents has been developed to try and streamline processes so that the institution is not being taken advantage of. And of course, we have been lobbying for the longest time possible from the government to add more money towards research. And luckily enough, I think in the past 2 years, the government has started putting some money towards research. So I know, again, it doesn't solve the problem fully, but at least it allows the early career researchers or the researchers that the flexibility to be able to access some resources and be able to do work that they feel is critical to their departments or progresses the overall agenda. And we actually have established a dedicated unit to take care of issues to do with interacting with external partners. We have a partnerships office now. The partnerships office, I think, is a year old. It's just 1 year old. Before, we used to look at it as a waste of time, but now we find it critically important. It streamlines all our partnership-related issues, coming up with an agreement. Anything to do with working in partnership has to go through that office so that all the processes are well streamlined. And of course, embedding accountability and transparency in the research culture to the individuals, but as well at the institutional level. And finally, we have also learned that we have strengths in being together as southern institutions. Many times we're always looking to collaborate across, but as you know, as south to south, we have actually real strength to work together first. I've seen that some of those collaborations where we've put together Makerere and partners in the region form a very strong ground, and they actually form a very good platform to even go ahead and work with the northern partners. They found you strong, grounded, well established. I think that normally produces quite some good and interesting results when it works out like that. So we are no longer overlooking our south to south. We are also highly considering the south to south collaborations. And lastly, ethical partnerships start from within. That's what I think. And if institutions fail to address internal inequities, no external policy is going to come and fix those inequities. And I would like us to leave us with this. I would like to leave us with this proverb that says, it's an African proverb, that if there is no enemy within, then the enemy outside will do you no harm. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Stella. Thanks so much, Stella. I'm going to try not to shout, but if I get the pitch wrong, please let me know. I hope that the presentation that I'm going to give is very complementary to your presentation just now, Stella. What would be helpful would be the slides, or do I start here? Okay, not a good start, Sas. Okay, I have to look. Okay. Okay, start again. So I'm going to be talking about an NIHR-funded piece of work that I'm leading, which is aimed at minimising and managing moral distress amongst frontline staff. And I want to talk in particular today about a frontline staff network that I've established as part of that programme of work. And I've deliberately put a question mark in this title, and I'd really love advice, thoughts, discussion on whether initiatives like this contribute towards equitable partnerships. It feels relevant to just let you know a little bit about my background for this talk. So I moved to Oxford in 2020 from Kenya. And before then, I was living in and working in rural Kenya for many years. I was lucky to be based at the Kemri Wellcome Trust programme, and over that period I did a whole series of health systems and empirical ethics studies, including on all of those topics bulleted on this slide. Over the period of time that I was based at Kemri Wellcome, the institution increased from 15 staff members to approximately 750. And over that period, there was a careful building of a lot of internal institutional accountability processes, including in areas like data sharing that have been highlighted as areas that Macquarie is also building. And these processes, these accountability processes, incorporated views from stakeholders, local perspectives, including community members. But over that time that I was working in Kenya, I became increasingly interested in frontline staff. And there's also been a lot of other people's research on the importance of thinking carefully about frontline staff. In many ways, they're conducting very complex and key roles in the production of knowledge, collecting data, explaining what research is about, answering questions from community members. But often frontline staff in research partnerships have least power and voice in what can be quite strong hierarchies. And we've seen in studies and in interactions that often they have inadequate support in conducting these very complex roles, especially during the conduct of research and after ethics approval has been secured. And a particular concern is about dealing with the emotional sides of work. And moral distress seems like an important hook to be able to think about this more. So moral distress is a concept that's been variously defined, but one way is to say it's when you know what the right thing is to do, but the structural environment doesn't allow you to do it. I'm not sure if you can, I think you can read these quotes here, but these come from frontline staff who talk about some of the kind of dilemmas that result from the work that they do. So my participants can't even afford a single meal. I feel responsible. I want to help them, but I don't know where to begin. I'm concerned about the quality of care being offered to mothers or babies, but I can't intervene to help. Or more generally, how do I empathize with a research participant so that they trust me and share knowledge and insights, but in a way that doesn't make me vulnerable to being affected by their trauma? So it's really important to think about how we work with moral distress, because it impacts individuals who are experiencing it, but also the quality of the science, what we learn, and the value of the work that we're all doing. So the programme of work, an initial plan was to conduct 3 very in-depth case studies, all with a Kenyan arm, very different ones, and then to see how much the learning is transferable through a large frontline staff network across several countries. And the goal was ultimately to contribute to guidance manuals and agreements on expectations, rights and responsibilities in relation to frontline staff, of funders, of institution leads, of PIs. And the first thing that we needed to do was to set up according to our proposal, this frontline staff network. And this felt really important to set this up appropriately. And I was a bit terrified recognizing the power inequities that are in so many research partnerships, how to do this. So it needed to carefully think about who to approach. And it was really important, I felt, to make sure that those who were involved in this network had the support and interest of their managers and their own leads, because otherwise it wouldn't be possible to engage productively. And the first meeting was held in March this year, and I was really anxious about talking about moral distress at a time when these drastic funding cuts had been happening and continue to happen. I was worried about what people would be experiencing and whether they'd feel able to share that. And so I got a lot of advice from people who are used to working in more participatory ways to think through how the meeting might be set up to hear concerns and to safeguard people's well-being. And what we did is we got quite a lot of input in advance of the meeting, which then fed into visuals, which were shared and discussed during the meeting. And so, for example, those visuals I showed earlier came from the inputs that people made before the meeting. And then during the meeting itself, we used a lot of visual and participatory methods to understand quite complex issues. And so here's just one example. There's a frontline staff member in the middle who's being pulled into this increasing vortex of community expectations on that staff member, and they're also being pulled in the other direction by research needs, demands, accountability, responsibilities in institutions. These types of moral distress and the emotional sides of it were really familiar to everybody. And a really useful word from Vietnam was to actually talk about the concept was the burden to the heart that comes from this work. We spent a lot of time talking about how we could build team and organizational processes to support frontline staff. So beyond just letting off steam, there was discussion on how teams or strong teams can be supported and built so that people feel able to contribute to key decision making, how there might be more collaborative engagements with frontline staff, how to have debriefs that actually function effectively, and where there's open communication. And really importantly was what is the organizational structure and setup that supports this kind of work, including clear and fair policies for frontline staff, security support, and access where necessary to confidential mental health support. So we were quite energized by this first meeting on what next. We were pleased to have shared our experiences, that we felt like there is things that we can do to make our lives and work better supported. And we agreed to have a whole series of sharing resources, to set up interest groups, mutual training activities, and built into the funding was a funding pot that could be flexibly used to respond to questions that frontline staff network members had. And on the basis of the discussions, I, together with the core team, decided to completely redesign the whole approach to the program of work so that instead of having those case studies that feed into guidance, together with consultations at the end, I'd set up a participatory action research network where we're trying to introduce support processes, learn from them as we go along, have the 3 case studies, but also additional case studies or illustrations that the frontline staff network members wanted. And so that's the approach that we're continuing with now. So the action happens throughout, not at the end. So just a couple of reflections on opportunities and challenges in relation to equitable partnerships. In some ways, we were lucky that the funder, NIHR, were willing to fund the topic, which is about strengthening equity, and the approach. We appreciate the flexibility of the funding within limits, and also the PI's support in different institutions. But there's a limit to how much flexibility there can be, and there are deliverables that are required by the funder. In terms of ongoing network engagement, the frontline staff are very keen to continue to engage, but as they do that, they're also having to compete with responsibilities to very busy line managers and within their own host institutions. And in terms of making a difference, it's really important what kind of support staff have within their institutions. And we know that research ecosystem pressures are really compounded at the moment, not least with the funding cuts, with more and more accountability demands as well as funding challenges. So just to finish, to mention that positively, we're excited about and continue to have regular meetings, mutual training activities. There's concept notes that have been submitted by the frontline staff members, and we're beginning to have initial outputs. Some are publications, but also other things like issue briefs and thinking about videos that might clarify some of the challenges and opportunities experienced. So I just wanted to say a huge thanks for the Frontline Staff Network members there, but also the core team who have been supporting with this work and continuing to do so.
Thank you, Stella and Sasi, for these wonderful presentations. So how long do we have for questions? I don't know exactly. Five minutes in total? 5 in total. Oh, okay, so sorry. Then just one question for Stella and one for Sasi. Who has a question for Stella? Yes, you first, but you had a question already. Someone who hasn't raised a question yet? So yes, you in the back.
So,
Oh, yeah, sorry, but I can only do, and I believe she hasn't raised her question. Yeah.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Both the Stella and the Shashi have the wonderful presentation. And I have a question to the Shashi. That after the Trump administration cut off the budget of the grant, and how the NIH manage the grant distribution to the partnership.
I think that question is to me about the whether the funding will continue, how they will continue it. That's a very difficult question to answer, unfortunately. So there's the challenges for moving towards equitable partnerships. The hope was, and is, that that the recommendations for funding would be to appropriately support frontline staff with dealing with these emotional parts of work, that funding is built in from the beginning. So it happens with all research that is funded. But we all know what's happened with NIHR funding recently. And so even the best of intentions, as they were there, have been drastically cut over the last few months. So luckily we're still together as a network for the next 3 years, and we'll be strategizing about how to maintain it.
Sorry. So then please raise your
not a
question,
question,
because
it's a
it's
brief
for Stella,
comment.
right? Yeah.
brief comment to Stella.
Yeah.
You mentioned a lot about data. There was this 2018 Global Forum of Bioethics in South Africa, which produced 6 papers. So I would like to refer to them, everybody reading about data issues.
Yeah, so it was the papers that have written earlier in 2000, so we couldn't hear your question.
2018 Bioethics in South Africa.
Okay.
So there are a lot of 6 papers talking about exactly what Stella mentioned. So I just wanted to tell the people who are not there.
Right.
to go through them.
Yeah, so that's a very nice a comment. So perhaps we can link the papers somewhere to the things that have been sent to you by email. But thanks for the comment. So is there someone also with a question? Yes.
Thank you. I'm Stella's colleague from Uganda, but from a different institution. I'm Claude Chirumuhuzia. Stella, you mentioned something about the senior researchers having very many grants in one go and having some kind of conflict of commitment. Is there any policy at Makerere that is moving towards solving that? We could borrow relief from it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think these policies have been around. When we get funding, I think it's standard practice to know that levels of effort may not exceed 100%. But in practice, things play out differently. So even at the institutional level, we have guidelines that now speak to the level of effort not going beyond 100%. And I think it's just, that's the usual standard and practice. But in practice, it plays out differently. And I think this is a call even to the researchers, because while we sometimes think that the iniquity is coming from elsewhere, but the iniquity and lack of ethics is from within for you to have commitment of 150% when realistically, and that is something that is probably unachievable. And this is why you see some of the researchers being called to meetings, they cannot make it. Their participation on meetings is almost nothing, but they are being paid for that effort. They have mentoring and other roles, but they are not able to come through with them because of that, too much commitment. So again, it's, I think, a call on the individual researchers as well. Like I said, we have institutional, but as well as researcher practices to understand that when you commit to be part of something, then come through to deliver on your part.
Thank you. Is this working as well? Yeah. So with that, we unfortunately have to stop the discussion, but I think please reach out to both Stella and Sassi if you want to hear more about their specific topics. We also now have time to explore what you have presented in the thematic breakout sessions. So focusing specifically on responsibility and accountability. And I think we have heard very nice examples, also your participatory approach and your more institutionalized approach. So please reflect also on our presentations during the breakouts. And with that, a big thank you to Sassi and Stella.